Hey everyone, Rock DIY here. Today I'm going to be removing and installing new front and rear struts on a 2008 Honda CRV. This vehicle has 160,000 miles on the original strut assembly, so it's time to remove the old ones and put new ones on it. Done a little bit of prep work. Got the front of the vehicle jacked up. I've got it on jack stands right now, and very first thing that needs to be done, I actually did a little bit of prep work last night. I sprayed penetrating oil on the nuts for the strut assemblies. This cover right here goes on right here. You just gotta remove it, get it out of the way. So there's 5 nuts that need to be removed up top on the driver's side. I only did this last night just because I wanted to make sure that I would be able to get these off, especially after 160,000 miles. So now the next steps are going to be to remove the tires and then work on removing the strut assembly. Before we move up top to remove the strut assembly nuts, what needs to be done is there's a 12mm bolt right here that holds the brake line onto the strut assembly. Then there's 2 bolts here that are 19mm, and then up top here you have a 19mm bolt, but you also have to use a hex bit to prevent it from spinning while you remove the nut. And then the speed sensor wire needs to be removed from here, and there's also a plug right here on the side that needs to be removed with the flat tip screwdriver. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'll go ahead and start with this 12mm bolt. Get that out of the way. Alright, 12mm nut is out. I'm going to leave it right there on the brake line, so I don't have to search for it. Hopefully it doesn't fall out. Now I'm going to remove this nut in order to release the sway bar link. Alright, so that's off. I'm going to put the nut back on here, just to make sure I don't lose it. And obviously, since you're removing the strut assembly, you want to take the top one off. You could remove the bottom one, but eventually you would have to remove the top one anyway. So start by removing the top one. This retainer right here is difficult to get under. You want to attempt to not damage this retainer. In some cases, it may be the only way to get it off. Alright, so speed sensor cable is off. Got the sway bar link off. Brake line off. Now I've got to remove these 2 19mm bolts. When you get to these 2 bolts here, the bolts themselves are a 19, and then the nuts on this side are a 22. Alright, so right now this whole bottom portion of the strut assembly is ready to remove. I just gotta remove the nuts up top and then be able to pop this strut assembly out. For this upper portion of the strut assembly, there's 5 nuts that need to be removed, and it is a 14 millimeter. I'm going to leave this one tight until the end, get the other 4 out. That way it has full support until I get ready to take it off. This very back nut closest to the windshield is not at the best angle to get off. It's good to have a magnet for getting these nuts out, because they're a little difficult to grab out of there. Very little finger room. Alright, so those 4 are out. Go ahead and work on this 5th one. I'll get it almost completely off, and then what I'll have to do is reach under and grab the strut assembly just to prevent it from completely falling. And I chose this one because it gives me finger access to the nut, so I can push up on the strut assembly, loosen the nut, and then just pull the strut assembly out. Strut assembly is out. And there it is. Little boot. This is almost like a whole bunch of onion rings, but there it is. And here is the new one. Now that I've got the old one out, I want to compare the two to make sure that everything is in the same place. Because if it's not, then you may put it on and then find out that something is out of position, or there's a tab or a hole that's in the wrong place. And from what I can see, these are both exactly alike, which is a good thing. It's always nice when you get new nuts and bolts when you purchase something. So for the top of the strut assembly, there are all new 14 millimeter nuts. But those are the only ones that came with it. None of the ones at the bottom of the strut assembly came with it. So now I'm going to slide this up in there, and then I'm going to have one nut ready to go in the same place as before, and I'll put the nut on there to hold it in place, and then put the others on. Since I don't have the car on a lift, this is a little more complicated because I can't really see that well up into where the strut assembly goes. I'm using this little wood wedge to help me keep it in place until I get the nuts on top. After all that, everything's lined up at the top. It will only go in one way, so you don't have to worry about putting it in the wrong holes. Don't be surprised if you buy new struts or any other part for your car and find out that the new nuts that go on are bigger or smaller than the ones you took off, because these are the ones that were taken off the old one, and these are 14s, and then the new ones are 15s. Just going to go around and tighten these up loosely initially, and then come back and tighten it all the way down. Just want to make sure that the strut assembly seats properly. This back nut has been a pain because of the windshield wiper arm being right there, so I couldn't use the long socket. I had to use the short socket. Alright, so it's seated. Now I just need to tighten it down. I'll use the star method to tighten it down, and then I'll come back and torque it to spec. These top nuts will be torqued down to 33 foot-pounds. Now to put everything back together. And I do need to start by getting this back on here first before I start connecting anything else. Wood block is pointless at this point. I'm just going to set this in here with the nut on it. So what I can do is I can use a pry bar, or I can use a bottle jack to lift this up to get it in position and then slide the bolts in. So instead of using a long pry bar or a 2x4 for leverage to lift this back up, what I have is a bottle jack underneath, and I'll jack it up until it gets to where it needs to be. I also have this pin right here, so if it gets close I can put the pin into one of the holes while I put the bolt in the other. This does require a little bit of manipulation to get it where you want it. So now that I got the top one started, I can manipulate this bottom one a little bit. Unfortunately, just because you get the top one in doesn't mean the bottom one's going to go in. So, need to move that around. There we go. Got both of those bolts in, got the nuts on, and once again 19mm, 22mm. These are torque to spec. Put this speed sensor wire back in place. Put this back in. That plastic retainer did hold up, so that's good. Not something I'll have to buy a new one. Now I'll go ahead and put this 12mm bolt back on the brake line. Last thing to do is tighten down the nut on the sway bar link, and then that'll be it. That's it for the front driver's side strut assembly. Everything's back in. Got the 5 nuts on the bolt heads up here at the very top. Got the sway bar linkage back in place. Got the brake line back in place, 12mm bolt, and then got these 2 bolts back in, 19mm bolts with 22mm nuts, and the speed sensor cable is back in place, plugged into the side here and inside the groove on here. And that is it for this side.